Welcome to Beer Hour. Beer Hour is recorded live at Boulevard Brewing Company.
Hi, welcome to Beer Hour, Kansas City Star's Facebook Live conversation with some of the city's most fascinating people. I'm here today with a truly fascinating woman, the fairly new Chancellor of Metropolitan Community College, Dr. Kimberly Beatty. Dr. Kimberly Beatty, welcome to Beer Hour.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, great. I said you're fairly new to Kansas City. You've been here a year. I think you're in your second year.
Yep, starting my second year. I came here in June of last year.
And where did you come here from?
Came here from Houston.
Oh, okay. And what were you doing in Houston?
Before coming here, I was the Chief Academic Officer, Vice Chancellor of Instruction at Houston Community College.
Oh, okay. And so have you been in higher education your entire career?
This is all I know. This is all I've done. I've been in it for 30 years, 31 years, but of course I started when I was 5.
You started when you were 5. I love it.
But yeah, and I've enjoyed every minute of it.
Great.
I've enjoyed
Well, being new to Kansas City, or fairly new to Kansas City, what were your first impressions of Kansas City?
Well, I tell you, it's funny. I tell this story a lot because when I got the call and I was being recruited to Kansas City, and they said Kansas City, and I was like, my husband and I made the conscious decision to live below Interstate 40 because we're both from cold cities.
Okay.
And we wanted to stay warm as we aged. But, the more I looked up the city and the institution and how it was a match for me, then when I came to visit, I just fell in love with it.
Really?
And that has not changed. In fact, it's increased. I can say I've lived in the LA area, I've lived in Houston, I've lived in Dallas, Fort Worth, and I've lived in the Washington metro area. Kansas City has everything that a large city has. It's just less people.
Yeah, I
that
say that
means
all the
less
time.
Traffic.
That's right. You can get anywhere you want to get in
Yes.
Kansas City like
Yes.
20 minutes, right?
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. Well, I did learn, I live in the northeast corner, and I have some friends that live all the way in the southeast corner. It takes me about 40 minutes to get to their house.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but for most stuff, it is about 20, 25 minutes.
What are some of your favorite spots in Kansas City? Have you found like your favorite restaurant?
Yes. Let me see. I love Q39. I love their barbecue.
Mm-hmm.
I like the happy hour at Cafe Trio.
Nice.
And I just, what I love about Kansas City are all the little nooks that it has. You go from the River Market, which I love Cascones for breakfast down there. Then you have the Crossroads, which you have Jack Stacks and what is that Italian restaurant?
Not
I've forgotten it's a real popular one that I go to a lot there. And then you've got Midtown, and then it just keeps going. And so I'm still exploring it a lot. You got the plaza and all the things that are down there.
I've been here 20 years and I still find places that I hadn't seen before, so I understand that.
Oh, and one of my favorite restaurants in the plaza, JJ's, discovered that. Real nice, fine dining. Mm-hmm. Really enjoyed my meal there.
So when you're traveling around Kansas City, who are you doing that with? Are you a family? I mean, who?
Well, I get a lot of great opportunities to do that because family are coming to visit me quite a bit, and so I take people around. But the work that I do, I get to see all of these things because I'm meeting people in different places, and that's one way I get to explore. And plus, we have 5 campuses all through the city, so I get to mill around and travel to those campuses and meeting people in each one of those cities, whether it's the chamber meetings or CEOs with other companies. And I just discovered Ginger Sue's down in Lee Summit. I had breakfast down in Lee Summit yesterday. And so that's how I really discover all these little nooks and crannies. And some of them aren't nooks and crannies. They're just great locations. But I love, what I like most about Kansas City is that it's wholesome. People are nice. And it's this type of town. It's a table talk type of town. The whole send an email and be gone, or call somebody and be done, it doesn't work here. You like to sit down and talk and
have a conversation, right?
Yeah. And that's good. That meets my personality.
We were talking about the job that you do. You're in community colleges. So I'm curious. I know that years ago there were junior colleges. We called them junior colleges. And then suddenly there weren't junior colleges anymore. They seemed to disappear, and we talk more about community college. Is there a difference between what a junior college was and what a community college is? Tell me a little bit more about what a community college looks like.
So I think it's language evolving and perception.
Okay.
So community colleges were born out of high schools back in the 1960s. All over the country is when they peaked. And it was really out of the democratization of higher education.
Okay.
Because as you probably well know, many of the institutions were very elitist and there was a cutoff, and then so very few people who were either low income or people of color didn't get into higher education. So the mission of community colleges from the very beginning was about access and providing access for all. And that's the mission, that's been the mission, and that hasn't changed. The shift from the language of junior college to community college is just the era in time. We're still philosophically junior colleges because we only offer the first 2 years of a 4-year track. So that's where that came from. Mm-hmm. We transitioned more so into a community college type of language because the focus of access and serving the community, and that being so core to the mission of most of the community colleges in the nation. But you also have, and especially in states like California, where they're not community colleges, they're colleges. So I started my career at Cypress College.
Oh, I see.
They've taken the community out of it, even though they're a 2-year institution.
What about the offerings at community college? Have the offerings expanded in terms of what is available to those people who attend a community college? Has that grown too?
Oh yeah, that's grown. Metropolitan Community College, for example, has more than 130 programs.
Wow.
And the fabulous thing about community colleges and why I love to do this work is because they're nimble, they're flexible. And so if the brewing industry is big here and they want to start a degree in brewing or I don't know what you would even call that, but let's just say they wanted to start some type of program that led into that industry, we would meet with them to develop a track to meet that industry demand. So a lot of the community colleges nationally, and especially here in Missouri, have developed programs based upon what the need is there. When I was in Houston, petrochem is big because you're right there with oil refineries. We don't have petrochem here because we don't need that. But we have other programs, manufacturing, welding, HVAC, those types of programs. And we also obviously have the transfer program so the students can have the best affordable option to get their first 2 years of college before they transfer to Mizzou or UMKC.
As you're talking about the programs that are available at community college, it makes me think about 2008, 2009, when the country was going through the recession. And I remember writing about community colleges at that time. They were booming in terms of their enrollment was just through the roof because people were going back for training. And I think at that time you guys were getting even a different type of student in the community college. But the economy has improved. And so I wonder what's happened to those numbers and how do community colleges, how is MCC dealing with that?
Yeah, we have a love-hate relationship with the economy. It is true, typically when the economy is doing very well, that enrollment for community colleges go down. There's the perception of the stability, well, and it's not really a perception. There's more stability, and so people don't feel like they have to not send, be conservative, and they can send their kids out of state or they can send their kids to the 4-year. What we're struggling with now, though, is a different type of message that I really want to make sure that we get out in this interview. As I go across this city, we've got a declining workforce. The baby boomers are all retiring, and yet we still have a city or a state that still feels like a 4-year degree is the best way to go. If you talk to a kid and say, what are you going to do when you graduate from college, they're not going to say, oh, I'm going to go be a machinist. But if you go and get a 2-year degree and you go into machining, welding, or HVAC, that's a $46,000 job out the door. Mm-hmm. And so the need for us to work with our communities to help them to see that careers like that are sexy. It's a challenge for us. And in this economy, even though the economy is good, most of our industry partners can see it, that they've got a lot of retirees coming, and they're telling me we don't have enough people coming in, and companies like Cerner and some of the other larger companies are having to go out of state to bring people in. I have, at Metropolitan, we have the programming, we have the capacity to meet that demand, but we've got to work harder to show how those careers are sexy.
How do you do that? I mean, I'm sure you're probably having those kinds of conversations, but what are some of the ideas for ways? I guess you've started in the K-12? Or?
Yeah, you start there, but that's really not our only market, and that's part of what I'm trying to help our institution to see. High school students, so there's the immediate game, the middle game, and the long game. So the immediate game is what you mentioned earlier, the adult learners, those people who, like my son, has a liberal arts degree, and he's working, but he's not working utilizing his degree. You've got an audience of adults out there that could come back and get retrained in, our fire academy, our police academy are short programs where you get intensive practical on-hands experience to get retrained and leverage, perhaps, like my son has a criminology degree, I'm telling him you need to come back and get in the fire department. You could then leverage that criminology degree in that way. I've forgotten how I went down that trail.
Well, we're trying to find out, how you...
Oh, how do you transform?
Yeah, how do you get people...
So one of the things that we're doing is making an investment in marketing. So now we've got a billboard on 35, we've got our commercials running on TV, because we have to let people know and do our due diligence that we're here.
Right.
When I met with the governor recently, I told him that there are states, when I was in Virginia, they took a statewide push on workforce and showing people, doing statewide messaging that is sexy, because that's his agenda right now. And so I think it's not only with high schools. So the short game, that's where I was. So the short game are those adults that need to be retrained.
Right.
We have to find a way to reach those adults through partner organizations, however that is, right? The middle game are the high school students, and we've already developed programs like we're in partnership with J.E. Dunn and North Kansas City Schools, where a student can go to school, get their high school diploma, and get a degree in building maintenance, and have a job with J.E. Dunn when they graduate from high school. The long game is middle school's parent education, so that when these kids are coming through and making their decision about their track for high school, they see the options that are available and don't see it as ugly work. That's the perception that we've got to shift.
I would think that it would be easier in Missouri, because in Missouri we've got the A+ program, which provides students with free 2 years of college if they meet certain criteria while they're in high school. And so I thought, well, surely there are because of the cost of higher education, surely there would be lots of students coming out ready to come into community college. Is that not helping?
Yeah, that is still the case, and actually our new student population is up in terms of enrollment. So that is the case, that Missouri is doing a great job with that A+, but you'd be surprised at the number of students who don't see college as an option for them. And now I'm fairly new to Kansas City, but there are some clear dividers in this city for communities to not keep them where I think the resources and the exposure is different in a way where they might not see that that's always an option. I won't go there, but
I was just going to ask you, what do you mean? What do you mean by that? If you could elaborate
I'll give you
just
a very
little
simple.
bit.
I think there's socioeconomic, and I think there are racial dividers.
Okay.
Just plain and simple. When I tell people I live north as an African American, they look at me and say, "Oh, really?" Right. And I wasn't aware of that, but it didn't make a difference. I love living up north. Right. When you get east of Troost, is that east? I think it is.
Yep.
When you get
Absolutely.
east of Troost, we know from our zip code data that we can do better in enrolling people from that area, but yet there's still, and that's not that far, but there is a barrier with, I think, a mental barrier that occurs with truths that for some reason we've got to figure out. It's our responsibility to figure out how to overcome that so we can get more of those students who have, again, it's the access and the right.
I'm glad you went there because I was reading your bio, and in that you were talking about championing these students, and you said that you can do that because of how you were raised and that their story is your story.
Right.
And I really wanted you to talk to me a little bit about that. I mean, did you go to community college? What do you mean their story is your story?
Well, what I mean is I could very easily have become the typical statistic. I was black. I was raised by a single parent. We came from very meager beginnings.
Where were you raised?
I was raised in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, in a house with 4 generations on 3 floors, where I shared a floor with my uncle and my mother, but it was all I knew.
Right.
So it was fun. I mean, having that family and so forth. I didn't know any different probably until I was grown, but the only difference that made the difference for me is that my mother went to college. I'm convinced of that. I took the 3 buses with my mother to go to college, sat sometimes in the classroom with her, and having that exposure, and I can remember, and I can still see the picture of me in my little yellow dress, probably when I was about 10 years old, and she graduated from college, and she was the first in our family to graduate from college, and that's the only thing that I think might be different about my story from others. So there's this video, it's an equity video that I show a lot at the college, and it talks about the economic advancement of all people and the barriers that hold us back, and it shows the statistics of those things that keep us back, and it's poverty, race, and those 2 things intertwine quite a bit. Being raised in a single home, and then the education. That last piece is the only thing that's a difference. And when I show that to the faculty and staff, that's the power we have in shifting and making generational change.
Right.
And I just feel so passionate about that because that's the only reason I'm here.
Did your mom push you up to go to college?
Oh my God,
was that
yes.
something that was talked about in your household a lot?
Yeah, that was, well, after her, it was like, everybody had to go. I'm the first in my family on my mother's side to have an advanced degree. And so it was, or a terminal degree, I should say. I don't think, or anyway. So yes, it was pushed that you're going to go to college. I did not go to a community college. I was raised, again, by a single parent, and my mother had this philosophy, and she modeled it, of standing on your own and having your own. And that inspired me to leave home to go to college so I could stand on my own and be on my own. And I was born and raised in Pittsburgh, which is a lot like Kansas City in terms of the divide that can happen between socioeconomic and racial groups. And I wanted to go to a historically black college, and so I went to Baltimore and went to Morgan. And so those are really the factors but I'll tell you the truth, I think I knew about Allegheny Community College, but similar to where we are in some areas of the country now, it wasn't a household name where I would have thought, oh, I can go to a community college and go right here.
Right.
That wasn't even a conversation that we had.
You went to a historically black college, and I'm curious.
All 3 degrees.
Wow. There's a lot of talk right now about historically black colleges, and some of them really struggling to survive, and the question of relevance and what's going to happen with historically black colleges. Do you think that you got a different education at a historically black college than you could have gotten at a predominantly white college? And if so, what is that element that you got there that you may not have gotten at a predominantly white college?
Absolutely, I did. My father I've said this publicly several times. When I called him, because he went to Syracuse, and I had all these options. I was a pretty bright kid, had all these options of where I was going to go to college. And when I told him I was going to Morgan, he said, "Morgan, you're going to go and get a black education and end up with a black job." My father died last year, and he had the opportunity before he died to see me in this role, and we had that conversation again. But what he was living with was the perception that it was less than, and it was actually more than. I never really read a black novel until graduate school. We read Things Fall Apart in Humanities, but the idea of a historically black institution is to prepare you to be above and beyond the best. So my specialty is Chaucer and Shakespeare, but what I learned is that Shakespeare was in love with a black woman. My mistress' eyes are nothing like the sun if hair grew wires and black wires were on her head. That he was in love with a black woman. That Aristotle was trained by Moore, which was a black man. His name was Terence. So you learned all of the top-notch education, but you got this black facts or this black history along the way. I can remember my history teacher, he said, "We're not going to have a textbook in this class." And he taught us a little bit of Swahili every day because he was African. But he taught us about history, but he did it through the eyes of an African, and you just got a different exposure to the real world. So I had teachers that went to Harvard. They went to the best institutions, and they came back and gave back. I wouldn't trade what I experienced there for a million years.
So it's obvious by what you just said that the question of relevance isn't even relevant in this conversation. No. But, I mean, there are 101 HBCUs in this country. Some of them are really tiny and really struggling. 90% of African American students who are in education go to a predominantly white school.
My son, one of them.
Are there some concerns about what might happen to historically black colleges? Do you have?
Yeah, I think there is a concern because I think the philosophy of it not being of this equal quality. I mean, that's a historical. I mean, I could really get into the chains of history that continue to keep certain aspects of our educational community. I don't want to call it, what is the word? Not necessarily segregated, but classified in a certain way where people don't, just like you have community colleges, you have state schools, and then somewhere in there you got HBCUs, then you got the next tier, and you've got the next tier. And again, people just don't always realize the value. The other thing is people don't give back to HBCUs. Right. So once you have people like myself who have been successful, they don't necessarily always get back. And I don't know if that's because, my alumni association knows where I am. I don't know if that's because they're not seeking out the alumni or people just aren't giving back. But it's the best. I can do a commercial for HBCUs.
I see that. I don't want this conversation to deal with race solely, but I do have another question, and this fits perfectly. You talk about what you're able to get at an HBCU as opposed to a predominantly white institution or a school like MCC KC. One of the things that schools or higher education institutions have been trying to do is diversify first their student population, and then secondly their faculty. But that seems to be the really hard element. Talk to me a little bit about why is it so hard to diversify faculty in higher education, and what do you guys do at MCCKC to do that?
Well, those are great jobs, and people don't leave them. That's the number one thing. So if you've got somebody that's teaching history, 9 chances out of 10 they're going to retire teaching history. And it's a great. I'm not saying that because it's like a gravy job or anything. It's a good job. I taught for 12 years, and I just got the administrative bug and itch, but I'm still in the realm of it. So part of it is we don't have huge attrition in our field. when people get these jobs, a lot of schools, even in community colleges, have tenure. People just don't leave.
I want to interrupt you for a second because I want to make sure I make this point that you are the first African American chancellor for MCCKC in 103 years.
That's correct. That's something. That's correct. So what we're doing, is all that we can do in terms of diversifying where we advertise, making sure that we connect with graduate schools, including HBCUs. Those types of things, and not only obviously HBCUs, but we've got a lot of schools that are Native American based and Hispanic serving institutions, and working through all of those to get as diverse of a population and attraction as possible. But part of it is we've got to do our work in making sure our committees are diverse, because a lot of people, they come. I remember when I was in Southern California, which has a very low African American population, and they always ask me to either serve on a committee. You're the one that has to, So I would serve on committees, and I would go to the job fairs. They always had a job fair, and always the people of color would come up to me and really ask honest questions about whether or not it was a good place to work, because I think it's the idea of academia and what it has to offer for all of us, but then it is also, just like it is for the students. That's part of the HBCU experience I had, being able to be in an environment where you see others who are like you and successful like you. That's important, and I don't know that people realize it, especially majority populations, because it's always the case.
Sounds like it's critical from what you were saying when you were talking about what you were able to get in an HBCU.
Right.
What that brought to the table for you. And if that doesn't exist at other institutions, there's a big hole there, right? Not just for the African American or the students of color, but what about the other students who are not the white students to get some of that knowledge as well?
That's right. When I was a faculty member, we developed a Black Studies learning community, and the majority of the students were not Black. But their exposure at the end, we had a project where they had to, we did a August Wilson play, and we had an English and history class. So they had to perform in an August Wilson play and talk about what they learned. And I still remember to this day those students talking about how they didn't understand what grits and collard greens were. So we did a lot around food and exposure. And so you're right, it's not just a Black thing or a Hispanic thing. It's about being able to work together across cultures, and you need everybody at the table to do that. But we do need to do better in terms of diversifying all groups. After I leave here, we are having a Men of Color Summit being hosted over at Penn Valley, and I'm giving some remarks there.
Is Kansas City Public Schools involved with that?
Kansas City Public Schools, Congressman Cleaver, they're sponsoring it. And it's those types of things that we have to do to continue to stress the value of education.
Do you guys have some kind of program? Is there some type of committee of chancellors and university and college presidents who get together to talk about, in this particular area, talking about this very issue? Because in 2015, that was one of the major concerns of the students who were protesting at Mizzou, was that they wanted a more diverse faculty and how to do that. Is that something that's being talked about?
I think, yes, I would say at the state level. I know our association, the Missouri Community Colleges Association, is working on. In fact, I think MCC is one of our employees is helping them to develop the curriculum of a diversity training for statewide, and creating a thread of professional development specific to that. Is it as prevalent as it probably should be? No. We're not having the conversations like we probably could and should.
There's some other questions I wanted to get to also. One of the things that another major issue, national issue, as it relates to colleges is sexual assault on college campuses.
I'm sorry.
Sexual assault, yes. And most of the time when when you hear the discussions about sexual assault on college campus, you're talking about the four-year institutions because those are resident institutions where they have dorms. You guys don't have that, but there must be some concerns and conversations around that issue in the community college realm. Can you talk to me a little bit about what you guys are doing where that's concerned?
Well, we're actually, as we speak, reviewing our operation plans and our emergency operation plans and our security and safety. For example, if we offer night classes, does every door in the building have to be open? So once classes start and you get at 7 o'clock, you can limit the entries so that there's only one way out, one way in and one way out. And then you can control the security a little bit more. This is a huge issue, especially for community colleges, because most of us are right in the community and we're open access institutions. And so it's a very serious concern. So we're literally looking at this now in terms of how we can control our environment a little bit more. Mm-hmm. Not that we have any issues or that I'm aware of with a high rate of any type of assaults like that, but we always want to be preventative and not reactive, right?
Right, that's right. You want to nip it in the bud. You don't want it to even start, right?
That's right.
You were talking earlier about access. I'm going to go back a little bit. You were talking about access. One of the things that relates or bumps right up against access is cost. And when you mention college to anybody, the first thing they're saying, oh my gosh, it's so expensive. And it is. How does community college fit in there? Because it's a lot more cost effective for community college, right? It's a lot less money to go to community college.
And I always say that Metropolitan Community College is the largest higher education institution in the region for the best value.
Oh, right, because I think it's like, even in this area, it's like, I think it might be the least expensive or the second.
It is.
Yeah,
it is.
And so
it is.
How different is the cost?
Well, I don't regularly look up UMKC's costs. I know for-profit schools typically are much higher because they get into a lot of loan debt. I would venture to say that our tuition is probably nearly half of what it would have to be at the universities per credit hour, but I don't know that for absolute, for sure. But what we have done, our board has done, is reduce the cost for dual credit students because of the very equity issue that I was talking to you about earlier, and that we know that we have students that can test into college, in other words, taking that placement test, and are eligible for dual credit courses but don't have the money to pay for it. So we reduce the cost in half for our students, for our dual credit students, to make it easier for the schools to supplement and do what they can do on their end to reduce the cost. So we're always looking at ways to make the cost and the best value for our students, and that's just what our mission is. Right. That's not a push to get more enrollment. If that comes, great. But our goal is to create equity and access for all of our students in the service area that we have.
You mentioned for-profit institutions, and they sprout up all over the place. And I was curious, does that impact community colleges when people are getting, some of them are promising things they can't deliver. We know that because of some of the things that have happened recently. But does that affect community college?
Absolutely, it does. I mean, because they do a great job, especially in marketing, that you can get this degree real quick and job placement. And to be frank, they have a business model that is sometimes impressive. I had a very good girlfriend who used to work for DeVry, and you were given a bonus based upon the student. So if you're an admissions counselor and that student is admitted, that's one spiff or bonus. They complete their first semester, that's another. They complete their degree, that's another. They get placed in a job, that's another. Well, what that does is incentivizes not people to, I'm not going to suggest lower any standard, but it incentivizes that admissions counselor to touch that student all the way through and make sure that they're getting pushed. We certainly couldn't sustain that type of model But I think that's one of the things that they sell that make them. But a lot of students go into big debt in these for-profit schools. And we have for-profit schools that are really in the health sciences space, even automotive and aviation and all those types of things. And so they duplicate some of the programs that we offer. But I think the experience is different. And so yes, they are competitors, but in terms of what we have to offer in terms of quality, and they're not a competitor. But the general public doesn't realize that.
So MCCKC has 5 campuses?
Yes.
5 campuses. It's Blue River,
Business
Longview,
and Technology, Longview, Maple Woods.
and then the Penn Valley campus,
Correct.
right? Now, do each of them have specialties? I mean, areas
Yes.
of specialty, like
Yes.
you go to a different campus for different things. Can you tell me about that a
I'm
little
so
bit?
glad that you've given me an opportunity to talk about that. So let's start with Longview. Longview's specialty, we have a automotive, in terms of workforce, we have an automotive program there that is certified in partnership with a lot of our big automotive dealerships here or not dealerships, but companies, Ford and so forth here. We also, our engineering program at Longview is one of the best programs that transfers right into our partner 4-year universities. Maple Woods, I'm always excited about our vet tech program out there. If you haven't been out there, I'd love to give you a tour of it. And they take animals in that have serious health issues, cancer or whatever. They teach the students nutrition, how to take care of those take care of those animals. They nurse them back to health, and then they put them up for adoption at the end of the semester or at the end of the year. And all of our campuses obviously have great transfer programs.
I was going to ask about that. Have you partnered with some of the 4-year institutions
we
here?
partner with all of them. And many of our students go to UMKC, KU, or to Mizzou, Kansas State. So that's where the majority of our students go. Rockhurst is another one where our students go. Let me see, Maple Woods. Business and Technology is really our career and tech campus, where we have most of our 90% of our career and technical programs.
And those are certification programs for the most part, where someone can get a certification for, is that what
certification and a degree.
Oh, okay.
So there's levels of certification that we're actually creating, so you can see, if I get this certification, I can earn this much. If I get a degree, I can earn this much, and how that equates by the industry. So we've got we got a lineman program there that's phenomenal, and machining and so forth. And then Blue River is where our Public Safety Institute, fire, police, and we're standing up cybersecurity there. Penn Valley, we've got, and all of these campuses have early college programs where our students go get their degree and their high school degree at the same time. And of course, at Penn Valley, we have our Health Sciences Institute right there on Broadway. Surge Tech, physical therapy, occupational therapy, all those programs, nursing, that students can get trained and get jobs. And that's what we want to do, is create jobs for students.
Well, that's a great place for us to end. I'm sorry we didn't have more time. I really enjoyed talking to you. Thank you so much for coming to Beer Hour. My guest, Dr. Kimberly Beatty from MCCKC. Thank you for joining us on Beer Hour.
Glad to be here.